We're here for our next video teaching for this series on the Hall of Faith, kind of walking through each of these characters in Hebrews chapter 11, asking ourselves, what can we learn? What is the writer trying to do with this Hall of Faith? Is this just a list of people that did faith well? They're like the faith superheroes, which is how I think we often kind of assume. And actually, when we start to look at the list, we go, well, that doesn't make any sense because there's people on this list I'm not sure should be here, and there's others that are missing. So what is the author trying to say? We've been walking through that. We did the contextual setup, and we've been seeing a theme. And I almost, in our last video, in our last teaching, I got wound up, and I read too far. I almost basically read right over, and I gave some passing comments to the next character in the story. And I think maybe even some of you were like, wait a minute, did he just kind of wrap Sarah up into Abraham and not even act like Sarah was her own unique mention? And I need to go back and make sure that we don't do that, because that was not my intention. I just kind of kept reading, and then I ended up being stuck. So let's go back and let's see this next character after Abraham. We talked about Abraham in our last video. But with Abraham, after Abraham in the Hall of Faith, Sarah gets a mention. Not just because she's a companion to Abraham, but because Sarah is also a member of this Hall of Faith. So I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna read that. I'm actually in a different Bible today. I don't know why this is the Bible I have next to me. I usually am reading out of the NIV, but I have the Christian Standard, the CSB, in front of me today, so it will read a little bit differently. But I'm going to go to Hebrews 11, and I'm going to start in 11. By faith, even Sarah herself, when she was unable to have children, received power to conceive offspring, even though she was past the age, since she considered that the one who had promised was faithful. Therefore, from one man, in fact, from one as good as dead, came offspring as numerous as the stars of the sky, and as innumerable as the grains of sand along the shore. And so she gets a mention, by faith, Sarah herself. By faith, even Sarah herself. So she gets her own unique mention in this Hall of Faith. Now, Sarah is this very unique character, and we're going to put in the description of this video, we're going to put the BEMA Podcast episode, where we taught on where we essentially meet Sarah and who Sarah might be. Jewish tradition often teaches that Sarah and Yiska are the same person. So we'll put that teaching in here. I'm also going to link 2 articles from the Jewish Women's Archive. They always have some amazing material. I'm going to link one article that's just kind of an introduction to who Sarah is, an overview, if you will. And I'm going to link a second article that talks about all the things that the midrash, the Jewish commentary, what Jewish tradition teaches about her. Not that all these things and all those details are true or accurate or historical, but it helps to see what Jewish tradition sees and how they respect her and how they see her, because how Judaism sees her is going to be a part of this Jewish author writing to a Hebrew audience, the book of Hebrews. That's going to be helpful to understand how the Jewish mind sees and engages with the Sarah character. The Sarah character is known as being like the fundamental template. I feel like in maybe more Western, maybe more Christian teaching, Abraham's the hero, and I think because of our more patriarchal leanings and moorings throughout classical history, I think Sarah's just kind of like, she's the tag along, like she's kind of along for the ride. And Sarah's not perfect, by the way. Like, Sarah has her moments in the stories, just like Abraham does. Abraham has some dark moments. He's no perfect hero wearing a cape, neither is Sarah. But Sarah is right there in every single story. Sometimes it's Sarah carrying the weight of the weight of faith. Sometimes it's Sarah like standing in faithfulness. Sometimes it's Abraham. Sometimes they're both together. Sometimes one is encouraging the other. But she's right there. Her mention it right here in Hebrews 11 talks about her willingness to believe that she could bear a son. And what was the exact phrase? The exact phrase was, by faith, even Sarah herself, when she was unable to have children, so she's this barren woman, She received power to conceive offspring, even though she was past the age, since she considered that the one who promised was faithful. And so this is going to fit that same theme that we've been seeing all throughout our study of Hebrews 11. Sarah believes, even though logic, even though what she can see, even though what she could understand, even though her past experience tells her things are going to work this way, that would be silly to put your hope in that. She actually believes that the one who promised was faithful, that God, in this case the angel of the Lord, but God is able to make good on his promises. She puts her faith, and this is the kind of woman she is. Like, she's the kind of woman that walks through the story of faith, not just tagging along with Abraham, but pushing the story forward. One of the things that you can read in those articles is that Jewish tradition believes that the Proverbs 31, what's called the Eshet Chayil. The Eshet Chayil in Hebrew is the wife of noble character of Proverbs 31. They say that Eshet Chayil is actually written in reference to Sarah, that she was the original Eshet Chayil. She was the thing, Jewish tradition calls her a prophetess, like one of the greatest women of all Jewish history. So this isn't like the Eshet Chayil in Proverbs 31 isn't just like a template of the good Christian wife this is this woman of chutzpah who knows what it is to chase after faith, to run things down. I mean, people are going to say that Ruth is an absolute play on the Eshet Chayil. People will make connections to Esther. She rules over 127 provinces in the book of Esther. And the rabbis say it's interesting that Sarah lives to be 127 years old. So all of these great women of the text, all of these prophetesses, I don't know how to say that word in the plural, all of these women who were prophetesses, they're really following in the footsteps. They're chasing after this original model of faithfulness. And Sarah, somebody who struggled, somebody who didn't have it all together sometimes, that she wasn't always perfect. She also knew what it was to suffer, to not feel whole, to suffer with infertility. And she stepped out and she chased down the story of God anyway. And then she receives a promise that in fact she's not going to, like the first part of her story, she doesn't even know that she's going to bear a child. We do, but she doesn't. So she presses on in faithfulness without that promise. And eventually she gets that promise. Her initial reaction is one of laughter. And in the story, she kind of gets rebuffed for that a little bit. But by the time that she's had a chance to sit with it, she believes. She leans in. God must be up to something in this story. God must be up to something. I believe that God can do something that doesn't make any sense. This barren woman who has to leave their home to travel westward to a land that they have no idea where they're going, and God's going to show them. Dysfunctional family, and she presses on. She presses on in faithfulness because she believes that God's story is crazy. She believes that in a good way. She believes that God's story is like, it doesn't make any sense. I don't know how this could possibly be, but God said so, so I'm here for it. That's Sarah. Like, that's Sarah. I even thought about for this video, just going back and reading the Eshet Chayil. Let's go to Proverbs 31. Again, I'm in the CSB just for today. It's not my usual. But let's just read this, and let's think about Sarah as we read this. Who can find a wife of noble character? She's far more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will not lack anything good. Just think about Abraham and Sarah's story, the ups and downs of what that looked like. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will not lack anything good. She rewards him with good, not evil, all the days of her life. She selects wool and flax. She works with willing hands. Think about Sarah baking 60 pounds of flour, 3 seahs of flour in Genesis 18 when these visitors show up. She is like the merchant ships bringing her food from far away. She rises while it's still night and provides food for her household and portions for her female servants. She evaluates a field and she buys it. She plants a vineyard with her earnings. Sarah's very active in the book of Genesis, engaging in sometimes not even the best of stories. I think about the story of Avimelech. I think about the story of them in Egypt. She evaluates a field and buys it. She plants a vineyard with her earnings. She draws on her strength. Sarah was a strong character. She had to be in order to keep saying yes and keep chasing down the story of God. She reveals that her arms are strong. She sees that her prophets are good, and her lamp never goes out at night. She extends her hands to the spinning staff, and her hands hold the spindle. Her hands reach out to the poor. She extends her hands to the needy. Abraham and Sarah, known for their hospitality to those who were on the outside. She is not afraid of her household when it snows, for all in her household are doubly clothed. She makes her own bed coverings. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. I think about Isaac moving into his mother's tents. When he comes back home to live at home, it says that he lived in his mom's tent. She makes and sells, let's see here. Her husband is known at the city gates, where he sits among the elders of the land. That's definitely Abraham. That fits. He makes and sells linen garments. She delivers belts to the merchants. Strength and honor are Sarah's clothing. She can laugh at the time to come. What does she do? Sarah's known for these moments where she laughs. Her mouth speaks wisdom, and loving instruction is on her tongue. She was a prophetess, so Jewish wisdom says. She watches over the activities of her household and is never idle. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also praises her. Many women have done noble deeds, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord will be praised. Give her the reward of her labor and let her works praise her at the city gates. What I love about that and why I read it is because Sarah was not perfect. Sarah was not this superhero that is unlike us. But she was a deeply strong, deeply committed woman of faith. She was filled with chutzpah. She pressed on. She pressed on before she had promises. She pressed on and did things with her husband that in the moment seemed like the right thing to do, and then they found out was a mistake, and she didn't let those mistakes define her, and she pressed on. She made mistakes at times, the way she treated her servants, pushing Hagar out. She wasn't perfect. She pressed on. She pressed on in faithfulness. She did not allow those chapters to define who she was, to define her self-worth, so that when the angel shows up and says, you're going to have a son, somehow she's in a headspace. She's in a heart space. Somehow she is the kind of strong-willed, chutzpah-laden prophetess that she says, that sounds silly to me, but if that's what God's going to do, I'm here for it. Because I believe that the one who promised is faithful. And so the writer of Hebrews says, don't forget people like Sarah. Oh, that makes me think of, there's a prophecy in Isaiah. Remember the rock from which you were cut and the quarry from which you were hewn. Remember Abraham your father and Sarah who bore you. That's what the prophet Isaiah said. Like, remember where you've come from. You've come from a story that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You've come from a story with unbelievably humble beginnings. Abraham and Sarah setting off. You know what? I'm gonna also include another link in the description here. One of my favorite songs by Andrew Peterson is a song by the name of Canaan Bound. I just love it. And the whole time I've been talking about this, that's been playing in the back of my mind. I'll put that in the description of the video too. Sarah, take me by the arm. Tomorrow we are Canaan bound, where westward leans the golden sun, and Hebron's hills are amber crowned. They take off for a land they don't know. They take off without a whole lot of promises. And over the years, they discover a little bit more about the promise. Over the years, they make horrible mistakes. They even have these moments where they do horrible things. They don't let these mistakes define them. They keep getting up. They keep pressing on. They keep trusting the story. And because of that, we talk about their faith. The writer of Hebrews says we can't be people that give up. If Sarah didn't give up, we can't shrink back, the writer of Hebrews says. We can't shrink back. We have to press on. If Sarah was willing to believe that her 90-year-old womb would be blessed with a child, we better not think that we understand what God can and can't do. We can't look at our own situation and say it's hopeless. If Sarah was willing to think that a baby could be put in her womb, we can't give up on our own situation. We can't give in to despair. So we have to persevere. And that's the next stop in the Hall of Faith. All right, we're going to see what happens in the next little paragraph. It's going to serve as a little break for us. It's going to be the perfect place to stop in our next video, right before we get to the high holidays, and we need to do some festival edition playlist work. But it'll be the perfect place to break before the high holidays. So we'll find you in that next video, and we'll see what the next stop in the Hall of Faith might be.